Hey guys, tonight we trace our fingers across something faint, something forgotten, a groove in time, a soft line scratched into a wax tablet almost 2,000 years ago. It's barely visible now, dulled by centuries, but if you hold it close, if you let your eyes adjust, you'll see it the remains of a Roman divorce letter, written not in rage but in resolve. This isn't a grand marble inscription or a bloody battlefield declaration. It's small, neat, ordinary, and that's what makes it unsettling. You probably think of ancient Rome as a world of emperors and gladiators, but under all that noise, there were women, quietly unmaking their marriages with a stylus dipped not in ink, but in decision. Here's a whisper that echoes louder than any sword clash. A wife, possibly in silk, possibly in silence, leaning over a beeswax tablet, carving her freedom letter by letter, not begging, not explaining, just ending it. No screams, no scandal, just a signature. And you have to wonder what kind of world forces a woman to whisper her goodbye. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where these stories reach. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking barefoot on polished stone, the air cool underfoot, and somewhere in the atrium, a bronze water basin gurgles softly. Rome doesn't sleep the way you do, even at night. You hear sandals scrape and soft murmurs rise from curtained doorways. But tonight's whisper is older, coming from inside a small wooden box, hinged with brass and sealed with a signet. You open it, inside a folded wax tablet, smoothed wood around the edges, blackish beeswax pressed flat, and there, barely visible, a message. Not to a lover, not to a senator, but from a wife to a husband, not asking for affection, not hoping for mercy. She's telling him it's over. Just imagine receiving that, in a society where paterfamilias, the father's authority, meant everything. Imagine unrolling a little wooden note from your perfectly respectable Roman wife, only to find a goodbye that doesn't plead. It declares, here's the part no one tells you: Roman women could legally divorce their husbands. Yes, in a patriarchal empire. Yes, in a toga-wrapped patriarchy, where women couldn't vote, couldn't hold office, couldn't technically even choose who they married, and yet they could leave. Not with a dramatic exit or public trial. No, that's for theater. This was simpler a message, delivered. Sometimes read aloud, sometimes just handed off. The stylus dug into warm wax, words cooling into permanence. And if you were on the receiving end, there wasn't a lot you could do about it. The law allowed it. And here's the twist you don't see coming. Divorce was shockingly common in Rome, at least among the upper classes. Senators' daughters, merchant wives, even empresses they divorced and remarried with a fluidity that would make a modern-day gossip columnist need a second scroll. But no, this story doesn't shout. It hides, it waits, and it reveals something we may not want to remember. That power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just a quiet scratch on wax. You picture her now, not a rebel, not a revolutionary, just a Roman woman with a stylus and a plan. She's not trying to make history. She's trying to get her life back. Maybe her husband neglected her. Maybe he embarrassed her in the forum. Maybe she's found someone else. Or maybe here's a thought: she's just tired of everything, of being spoken for, spoken over. So she carves it out, letter by letter, uxor maritum reliquit. The wife has left the husband. No dramatic monologue, just fact. And now the wax cools. The tablet closes, and the courier prepares to deliver the message. This is where things get sticky, because historians still argue whether these women acted entirely on their own will. Yes, Roman law technically allowed a wife to initiate divorce, but the layers of social pressure, family intervention, and dowry complications muddy the waters. Some scholars say women needed their fathers' or male guardians' support to make the move stick. Others believe elite women, especially wealthy ones, held enough leverage to make the decision themselves. It's one of those rare areas in ancient law where the text gives women power, but real life, as always, complicates things. Still, the wax tablets speak, They don't show fear. They don't show weakness. Just finality. And if you're wondering why wax, why not paper, why not papyrus, it's because wax tablets were reusable, discreet, and private. Perfect for something you didn't want gossiped about before you were ready. Picture a double-leaf tablet, hinged and folded like a modern notebook, beeswax smeared inside, and a stylus nearby. You could write, erase, rewrite. But once sealed with a signet and sent with a servant, it became law. That's the quiet genius of it. A woman didn't need a courtroom or a council. She needed a tablet, a few words, and the courage to let them go. Now, here's a quirky little side detail for you. Some archaeologists believe the wax tablets were sometimes perfumed. Imagine that. A scented breakup letter, clove or myrrh rubbed along the wooden frame, as if to soften the blow or mark it with something unmistakably feminine. It's like a whispered final touch. This came from me. You can almost smell it now. Warm, resinous, lingering in the folds of the messenger's tunic as he walks it down the mosaic hallway. And just to confuse things further, Roman men also used wax tablets to propose, to seduce, to confess. The same medium that carried "I love you" one week could carry "I'm leaving you" the next. It's poetic. In that dry Roman way, no one really talks about that, the idea that wax held both beginnings and endings, that it bore witness to both oaths and goodbyes. It's a bit like texting on a borrowed phone. The message matters more than who owns the medium. You look closer at the tablet in your hand. Maybe there's a smear. Was it hastily written? Were there tears when she carved the words? Did her stylus shake? Or was it done with terrifying calm? Like a woman who had rehearsed this in her head 100 times. You imagine her sitting back in her triclinium, sipping watered wine, letting the tablet cool beside her as she stares into nothing, or maybe everything. Because this wasn't just paperwork. This was rebellion with good posture. You didn't need to scream to be heard, you needed precision. It's the kind of strength you don't notice until the man is already gone. The villa half emptied, the dowry taken back, the slaves reassigned. It's strategic silence, and Rome never quite knew what to do with it. It preferred women loud with laughter or quiet with submission, but this quiet, this intentional silence written in wax, that was terrifying, that was unpredictable. You're still holding that tablet in your hands. It's warm now, almost soft. Your thumb fits right into the groove where she pressed the stylus, and for just a second, you're in her body, with her breath, with her hand, and you understand. Not because she hated him, not even because she loved someone else, but because she remembered herself. You wake slowly in her world now, where marriage isn't what you think it is. There's no white dress, no romantic vows, no clumsy dance floors or long toasts from weepy uncles. You're in ancient Rome, where marriage is a contract, and that contract has less to do with love and everything to do with social scaffolding. You don't marry a person, not really. You marry their father, their estate, their status. You marry the ceiling above your head and the roof above theirs. And from the moment two families agree that this arrangement suits their mutual ambitions, you are part of the legal machinery. You become a clause, a provision, a movable asset. There are two types of Roman marriage, cum manu and sine manu, and you quickly learn which one you're in matters more than anything else. Cum manu, meaning with the hand, transfers you entirely into your husband's legal control. You lose rights to your own family, your own property. Even your name gets swallowed up by his clan. But if you're lucky or just politically valuable, you get a sine manu marriage. That's without the hand, and it means you stay under your father's legal guardianship even after marriage, which, weirdly, gives you more control. You're still technically under male authority, yes, but not your husband's. And that means if things sour, you can walk away without needing his permission. It's not freedom as you know it, but it's Roman freedom structured, brittle, and built into legal precedent like a loophole that only works if everyone agrees to pretend it's not radical. Now imagine your wedding day under that system. You're 17, maybe younger. Your hair's twisted into a flame-shaped bun. Your stola is dyed saffron yellow for the occasion, and you're being escorted more like it into a room where your future is waiting in sandals. He's older, maybe by a decade, maybe by 2. He nods politely, offers you a fig, maybe a compliment about your father's orchard. The wedding ceremony is small, attended by a few witnesses and the necessary omens. There's no priest, no ceremony that's legally required. It's more about the agreement, the handshake between patriarchs. You pour out a bit of wine to Jupiter. You join hands. Someone records the date. You are now a wife, just like that. No passionate kiss, no "you may now," just a silent transfer, like property passed from shelf to shelf. You start your new life in his domus, and you learn quickly that being a Roman wife means being invisible in the right ways and useful in the rest. You run the household, you manage the servants, you coordinate feast preparations, you supervise the spinning room. You're expected to be modest, disciplined, and reserved, but not stupid. A Roman matrona is supposed to be respectable, yes, but also shrewd. You track inventories, you control household finances, you keep the social gears lubricated with the correct guest lists and offerings. And through all this, you smile gently, because smiling too much would be vulgar, and frowning too obviously might invite gossip. But here's where it gets interesting. Even though you can't vote, you learn that your reputation votes for you. The way you carry yourself in public, the way you whisper greetings to senators' wives at the baths, the way your household appears orderly and unscandalous, this becomes a kind of soft currency. And if your husband turns out to be a liability drunk too often, rude at the wrong parties, embarrassingly overdrawn at the chariot races, you start weighing your options. Because even though the laws are written by men, the system occasionally lets a clever woman pass through its cracks with barely a whisper. And you know the loophole exists. You've seen other wives do it. Quiet exits, elegant ones. You've seen wax tablets disappear into messengers' sleeves, only for gossip to bubble up a week later. Did you hear Terentia sent one? Left him flat. Took the dowry with her, too. Which brings us to the dowry. If marriage is a contract, the dowry is the currency of its seriousness. Your father gives your husband a sum, could be land, gold, slaves, furniture, and that dowry is both incentive and insurance. If the marriage ends, the husband usually has to return it. Not always all of it, not always immediately, but enough to make divorce a financially risky move. Unless, here's the twist, it's you initiating it. Then, you can demand its full return, especially if you stayed loyal, especially if he didn't. So the dowry, while technically property, becomes your leverage, your legal boomerang. The thing you can take back if the arrangement turns sour, and in that sense, it's not just a price, it's a warning. You start to understand how all of this weaves together. Marriage, dowry, reputation, legal status. It's not love, not in the romantic sense, but it's intensely personal, because you live inside it, you breathe it, and when things go wrong, you don't shout, you don't break plates or storm out. You write. You borrow your husband's own tools, a tablet, a stylus, a messenger, and you send him your farewell like a ledger update. He opens the note, thinking it's household accounts. Instead, it's you, leaving. And here's the detail that makes historians sweat. We don't have many of these divorce tablets surviving. Beeswax melts, after all. Wood decays. Most messages like these were temporary by design. But we know they existed because Roman writers mentioned them sometimes mockingly, sometimes with disdain. Martial, for instance, snipes at women who divorce too often, like they're swapping tunics. Juvenal sneers at their audacity, calling them ungrateful and loose. Pliny the Younger, ever the gossip sponge, hints at domestic drama in his letters. But the tone is always the same discomfort. Men writing nervously about women who write back. That's the real scandal, not the divorce, but the voice. And then you realize this isn't just about wax. It's about control. Who gets to write the story? Who gets to end it? And for once, it wasn't him. Imagine a morning where everything looks the same olive oil lamp, the same bread baked at dawn, the same slave sweeping the portico. But today, you've written the tablet. It sits on your lap, sealed with your father's ring. You're dressed plainly, nothing to suggest upheaval. Your husband leaves for the Senate, and you call for a servant. Deliver this, that's all. He bows, takes the tablet, and disappears down the marble steps. From here, the shift is seismic but silent. The letter arrives. Your husband reads it. He may rage, or stare blankly, or crumple the thing in disbelief, but legally, he can't stop you. The sine manu loophole protects you. You've spoken through the law, not around it. You haven't made a scene. You've made a statement. And now you wait, not for permission, but for acknowledgement. You send word to your father's house, you pack your things, or maybe you already did. Maybe your trunks are already strapped to the mules, waiting outside. You're not running away. You're returning to your name, to your dowry, to a place where you can decide again. Not freely, this is still Rome, but deliberately. Here's a fringe theory for you. Some scholars believe that divorce letters were sometimes accompanied by symbolic tokens. A bracelet removed, a pair of sandals left behind, not required by law, but rich in message, like modern breakups with photos deleted or rings mailed back. It's not the object. It's the meaning carved into absence. And the wax, it preserves that absence perfectly. It holds space where words once pressed, cooled into silence. It lets you say everything and then vanish. The wax is cooling again, and you sit in its silence. Outside, Rome churns on vendors calling out Mulsum prices, the clatter of hooves in tight alleyways, someone shouting about stolen olives, but inside this space, the only sound is memory setting like plaster. You're watching a Roman woman do the math in her head. Not arithmetic, something deeper and messier. She's measuring dignity against disgrace, comfort against control, and she's measuring it all with the weight of her dowry. You see, in ancient Rome, the dowry wasn't a sentimental gift from a bride's family. It was a legal instrument, almost a weapon, and sometimes the only shield a woman had. Her worth in a marriage began, and often ended, with that number. Her father negotiated it. Her husband benefited from it. But if she left him and left him properly, she could take it back. Not just the money, but the leverage. The power to shake him in the one place Roman men pretended couldn't be shaken, their wallet. Because in the empire, wealth wasn't just about luxury. It was about public status, senatorial privilege, even eligibility for certain offices. Losing a dowry meant more than embarrassment. It could mean falling out of favor, out of circles, off the list. And if she demanded it back in full, he didn't just lose her, he lost standing. But there was more to it than that. The dowry wasn't just a number on a scroll. It was tied to furniture, land, jewelry, even people. Slaves gifted as part of the package could, legally, return with the wife. Imagine the awkward logistics servants packing the wife's gowns by candlelight, unsure whether they're still her property or now his. A scribe counting goblets, a steward double-checking the livestock. Everything had to be accounted for, because if you left improperly, or too emotionally, or without keeping the records precise, you risk losing it all. So Roman women got smart. They hired lawyers, or, more often, had their fathers do it. They learned the phrasing that held up in court. They knew which clauses let them retain assets, and which ones erased years of living like it never happened. Historians still argue whether this made women free, or just better managed property. Some say the dowry system empowered women by giving them real, actionable financial stakes in their marriages. Others insist it reinforced the idea that women were valuable only in terms of what they brought and what they could reclaim. But in practice, you see both things at once: women who navigated this system with cunning, and women who were swallowed by it. The same tablet that set one free left, another bound by legal gray zones and greedy relatives. You can almost hear the courtroom debates now, whether she deserves the rugs, the orchard, the necklace her father gave her, whether that golden brooch was hers, or part of the agreed household property, whether the slave girl she raised as a companion should follow her, or stay behind to stoke her ex-husband's fire. You feel the weight of it, don't you? Divorce wasn't a moment, it was a process, and a risky one. Even if legally permitted, the social consequences stretched far beyond the tablet. For some women, it meant returning to their childhood homes in disgrace, the family reputation bruised, the marriage deemed failed. For others, it was a stepping stone to remarriage, often within weeks, sometimes to a higher status partner. Remember, Roman elites treated marriage a bit like political seating arrangements. If an alliance was no longer useful, it could be rearranged. And a divorcee with a decent dowry and a clean record, she could be surprisingly in demand. Think of it like strategic recycling, except instead of bottles, it was entire people. But if you're picturing heartbreak, slow violins, shattered dreams, well, slow down. Rome didn't always do melodrama. The emotional tenor of divorce is hard to trace because the sources are mostly male, mostly judgmental, and mostly fixated on what the divorce meant for society, not for the people inside it. You'll find essays on morals, satire on promiscuity, letters from worried fathers, but very few words about how the woman felt when she etched the stylus into wax. Did she cry? Did she laugh? Did she pause halfway through and scratch it out? Or did she write it clean, in one go, hands steady, knowing the law was finally on her side? There's one tablet you remember reading about, reconstructed from a secondary source? Of course, because the wax is long gone. It wasn't even dramatic. It read something like, "Let it be known that I, Valeria, release myself from my marriage to Gaius, having no complaint beyond weariness, and I reclaim what is mine." That word, weariness. Not betrayal, not rage, just tired. You understand that. The quiet kind of tired that doesn't scream for justice, but still demands change. That's the pulse of these divorce tablets. They don't always burn. Sometimes they just sigh. And here's a quirky footnote from the fringes of the archives. Some Roman women, especially in the upper classes, are rumored to have pre-written multiple versions of divorce tablets. One polite, one scathing, one poetic, just in case the occasion required flair. Think of it like templates on your notes app. Some historians dismiss this as urban legend, a joke blown out of proportion by satirists. Others say there's a kernel of truth that Roman wives, aware of the legal flexibility they possessed, prepared themselves emotionally and rhetorically long before ever sending one out. It's hard not to respect the move. In a world where spontaneity was dangerous, preparation became its own quiet rebellion. So now you're standing in a villa courtyard, and a divorce is unfolding, but not like in the movies. No yelling, no object hurling, just a few neighbors watching through half-closed shutters, a courier waiting for payment, and a wife, standing still, holding her signet in one hand and her future in the other. She nods once. The letter leaves, and that's it. The contract breaks not with a scream, but with a sealed hinge clicking shut. Now watch what happens next. Word gets out. A servant whispers to another household. A friend spots her back in her father's home. Within days, Rome knows. It always knows. And the whispering begins. The questions are predictable. Was he unfaithful? Was she barren? Did she spend too much at the market? Was he too cruel? Too boring? The stories spiral. And this, perhaps more than anything, is what the woman had to prepare for. Not just the legal battle, but the reputational one. Rome ran on rumor, and a woman with ink on her fingers and wax under her nails was an easy target. You hear her name now, floated over garden walls. Some say she's bold, others say she's foolish. A few admire her, most pretend not to. But you, because you've seen the tablet, you've felt the stylus groove, you understand she's not asking to be liked. She's asking to be done. And done means done. Here's a final thought to sleep on. Sometimes the stylus breaks. Mid-sentence, mid-word, the pressure too hard, the wax too soft, and the message leaves a jagged scratch across the surface. Some archaeologists call it damage. Others, mistake. But you know better. That's not an error. That's a heartbeat. You blink into the heat of a Roman noon, and she's already walking her sandals, clicking steadily against the stone, her stola brushing dust from the marble, her face unreadable in the glare. No guards, no theatrics, just a single servant trailing a few steps behind, carrying a sealed wooden tablet in both hands as if it might bite. This is how she does it. This is how she unmakes a man's reputation. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with formality. You want to stop her? Ask her if she's nervous, but she wouldn't answer even if she heard you. Her mind is already somewhere beyond this dusty villa, maybe on her father's estate, maybe on tomorrow's silence, maybe nowhere at all. Because sometimes when you've had to pretend for too long, freedom doesn't feel like joy. It just feels like nothing. And that nothing, after years of performance, is intoxicating. He's inside. Of course, the husband, the senator, the Roman man who still believes his titles shield him. He's dictating a letter or sharpening a speech, completely unaware that today, the only thing that will matter is a document arriving with his name carved into its undoing. She wasn't born reckless. She was raised polite, educated just enough, trained to weave stories into smiles. But you can only be told to be grateful so many times before your gratitude begins to rot. And his crimes, if you could even call them that, weren't theatrical. They were banal. Indifference. Disrespect. The quiet insult of treating her like elegant furniture that breathes, not an enemy, just irrelevant. And Rome was built for men like that. Men who hurt by omission, who stole peace by being busy, by being absent, by always needing to be louder than her thoughts. But this morning she wrote the last sentence, and the stylus didn't shake, not once. Now the tablet is placed gently into the hands of a junior clerk, someone barely old enough to shave, and he stares at it like it might explode. He knows what this is. A divorce declaration, composed by a woman, delivered to a sitting senator. It will spread. Not because she asked for attention, but because women who leave without permission always gather spectators. Rome pretends not to look, but it watches everything. Especially a well-dressed Matrona who decides she's had enough. You follow the tablet as it moves across the city like a slow-burning fuse, past the market stalls where women haggle for fish, past the temples where priests sprinkle salt and whisper omens, past the steps of the Curia, where her husband will soon stand reading her words in disbelief, and you can almost see the flash of confusion on his face when the clerk reads the opening line, I, Aurelia Sabina, do release myself from this marriage, and reclaim what was mine. No preamble, no flattery, just the legal dagger slipping in, smooth and irreversible. And you wonder, did he know, had he sensed it coming, or did he really believe she would smile through another year of being erased? It's a strange thing, watching power shift without thunder. The senator doesn't shout. He doesn't throw the tablet. He just stares at it, then dismisses the clerk with a nod so sharp it could cut wax. He's not worried about losing her. He's worried about who's watching him lose her. Because this isn't just personal. This is political. A man's wife leaves him, and suddenly whispers begin about his control, his influence, his manhood. And in Rome, the manhood of a senator wasn't in his muscles, it was in his household. His wife was his mirror, his ornament, his proof of stability. If she walks, the mirror shatters, and the form buzzes. But she's already gone. Not running, just walking. Head held, gait calm. Her father's villa waits beyond the olive groves. She knows the route by heart, though she hasn't taken it in years. The same pebbled roads where she once rode side saddle as a bride now feel like open corridors. Each step forward is a step away from his shadow. And it's not until she sees the villa's gate that she exhales. Just once, quietly. You might ask why she didn't confront him, why she didn't sit him down, look him in the eye, say the words herself. But that's not how Rome worked. Confrontation between spouses, especially women speaking boldly, was considered theatrical, even vulgar. The stylus, not the voice, held authority. The written word preserved dignity. And in a world where men dominated speech, writing gave her space to own her decision without interruption. She didn't want his reaction. She wanted distance, the kind that couldn't be argued with. So she carved her silence into wax and let the law speak for her. Here's a fringe detail that catches your breath. Some ancient scholars believe that especially powerful women empresses, high-ranking patricians had divorce scribes, not just lawyers or messengers, but personal scribes who specialized in composing tactful, ironclad separation notices. These weren't emotional rants. They were carefully crafted legal riddles, designed to leave no room for retaliation, and sometimes they included embedded clauses warning the husband not to slander her name in public, or face formal penalties. Pre-modern restraining orders, tucked into folded wood and wax. It's the kind of detail modern textbooks gloss over, but it stays with you, doesn't it? That even in a culture built to silence women, some found a way to write louder than any senator ever spoke. Now she's inside her father's villa, sitting on a shaded bench in the peristyle. Servants hover but don't speak. Her father walks slowly toward her. He knows. Of course he knows. The arrangement had been legal, strategic, even advantageous once, but now it's dust. He doesn't ask questions. He sits beside her, not touching, not lecturing, just presence. And after a few moments, she hands him a second tablet, this one for the retrieval of the dowry. He takes it without surprise, reads it without sighing, because he understands what this really is: not rebellion, but reclamation. And you're still sitting with the first tablet, aren't you? Still tracing the line where her stylus pressed hardest? There's something there. Maybe not anger, but insistence. The kind of pressure that comes from clarity. It's a strange feeling, holding that certainty in your hands. You're used to stories that twist, that beg, that unravel, but this one only unfolds. One page, one exit, one woman who knew that waiting any longer wouldn't make it easier, just heavier. Historians still debate how many women sent these tablets. Was it hundreds, thousands? The elite class left more records, but what about the wives of merchants, of scribes, of minor landowners? Did they write, too? Did they scratch their freedom into old tablets borrowed from their husbands' accounting drawers? The wax, being impermanent, rarely survives, but the mentions linger in letters, in court records, in offhand remarks from poets too clever for their own good. The shadow of these women remains, even if the tablets don't. And here's your last image for tonight: the tablet, now closed, sits in a pile of correspondence on a senator's desk. Beside it, a scroll of pending votes, an unfinished poem, a list of dinner guests. But none of that matters, because the seal on the tablet is hers, and the words inside are hers. And for once, the ending was hers to choose. Not perfect, not painless, but hers. The door creaks behind him as he finally stares at the tablet again, really stares. The wax has cooled, hardened slightly in the midday warmth. The edges of the characters still sharp, her handwriting deliberate. He recognizes the pressure points, the spacing. It's unmistakably hers. She didn't rush this. She didn't rage write it in a moment of passion. No, this was outlined, reviewed, polished. There's even a faint trace of sandalwood on the edge of the tablet, her perfume. Intentionally left or carelessly smudged. He'll never know. But the scent disorients him, not because it's unfamiliar, but because it's suddenly detached from her body. It clings to the wax instead, as if the letter itself were a woman now, perfumed and present, whispering goodbye in a language sharper than speech. He sets it down slowly. You can almost hear the wood click against the marble desk, and he does what so many Roman men of his rank learned to do. He sends for a scribe. Now we shift focus, not to him, but to the man who will now be tasked with preserving this event in writing. He's young, barely more than a boy, but his fingers are stained with ink, and his eyes have already learned to notice details most clients ignore. His name is Livius, and this isn't the first divorce record he's transcribed, though it may be the most prestigious: a senator's wife, a well-known household, the kind of rupture that shifts the social floor ever so slightly beneath the feet of Rome's elite. Livius doesn't speak as he unrolls his parchment and dips his stylus. He simply listens. The senator begins his dictation with all the rigidity of wounded pride. Let it be recorded that on this day, I received a message from my wife. And Livius keeps pace, writing cleanly, eyes low, but in his mind, he's imagining the woman who wrote the original. He's seen her once or twice from a distance, trailing behind her husband, always in muted silks, never gaudy. Her face, he remembers, was calm, not cold, just measured, the kind of woman who knew she was being watched. And here's the odd thing: Livius knows this isn't just administrative work. He knows that copying the event into the record gives it shape, authority. In a way, he is the one freezing it in time. The tablet was hers, yes, but the scroll will be his. He's heard rumors that some scribes soften these moments, choose gentler verbs, omit brutal details, but he won't. He writes it as she said it, word for word, letting her tone speak across the stylus of another man. There's power in that, in copying a woman's final sentence into something that will outlast them both. You glance over his shoulder, watching the characters form, and you realize just how complex these roles are. The senator thinks he controls the narrative, but he's merely responding. The scribe holds the quill, but he's following someone else's lines. And she's already moved on. Her story closed with a click of wood and wax. Now other hands carry it forward. This is how Roman divorces became public truths, not through the actual moment, but through the transcription. The scribes, not the lovers, shaped history. And that means every divorce we know about, every scandal, every whispered separation passed through hands like Livius. Here's a quirk to chew on. Some scribes kept private copies of the more notable separations. Not officially. Of course, that would have been deeply illegal. But unofficially, hidden in private collections, anonymous accounts. Even poetry disguised as satire. This means there may have been entire underground libraries of Roman heartbreak, passed among the literate elite like scandalous bedtime stories. Historians still debate whether this was common practice or fringe gossip, but even the possibility makes you wonder how many wax tablets lived on, reinterpreted, rephrased, reread by men who never knew the full story. Back to Livius now. He finishes the dictation, dries the ink, and seals the record. Then he stands, gives a shallow bow, and is dismissed. But he doesn't leave the villa right away. He lingers in the colonnade, listening to the echoes of the senator pacing inside. And maybe he thinks about the kind of world where a woman has to buy her voice with silence. Because, make no mistake, these tablets were expensive, even if not in coin. They cost time, subtlety, social risk. Sending one wasn't the real challenge. Deciding to send it, that's what took the courage. And Livius, though young, seems to understand that, because he tucks a mental note into his memory, a quiet record of a quiet act. You trail behind him into the Roman street, where the city roars like always, unaware of the tectonic shifts that just occurred behind villa doors. That's how Rome works. Big emotions behind small gestures, history behind routine. A divorce isn't a war, but in this culture, it has all the politics of one. There will be fallout. Her husband's friends will withdraw slowly, unsure where the line is. Invitations will arrive late or not at all. Women will whisper approval in the baths, but deny it publicly. And through all of it, her wax tablet remains the center. It's like a pebble dropped in a still pond. Not loud, just inevitable. And what of the other scribes? The ones who write her side of the record? Because yes, there are others. Private ones. Trusted ones. She won't rely solely on her father. She'll commission a copy of her message, notarized and stored. Maybe not for court, hopefully not, but as proof. Because if rumors start, if her husband attempts to distort the ending, she'll need to show that she acted with restraint, legality, dignity. Rome loves documentation. It loves records more than truth, and she understands that. She plays their game with better grammar. You pause here to absorb a small, strange fact. Women sometimes chose to have their wax tablets recast into small ceremonial items after the divorce charms, amulets, even handles for new styluses, as if melting the message made it disappear from public view and reappear as private power. Again, fringe theory, not widely accepted, but there's something poetic about it, turning a goodbye into a tool, taking the sharpness of the stylus and giving it a second life. You picture her now, months later, signing a purchase contract with the same stylus that once ended her marriage. That's Roman pragmatism with a layer of myth. And yet, for all this elegance, there's risk. There always is. Because while the law allowed for divorce, society wasn't so generous. If she marries again too quickly, she'll be mocked. If she doesn't, she'll be pitied. If she speaks too freely about why she left, she'll be accused of dishonor. So she keeps it close. Not hidden, just controlled. She visits only certain homes, accepts only specific invitations, keeps her laughter measured, her clothing uncontroversial, and in this dance of restraint, she survives. Historians love to debate how many of these women were truly free. Was the wax tablet a liberation or just a more elegant cage? Some argue that it gave elite women a tool of agency. Others say it simply disguised the chains with prettier cuffs. But when you follow her movements, how she writes, how she walks, how she reestablishes herself, you see something undeniable: control, not over the world, but over herself. And in ancient Rome, that's no small thing. You close the record now, the scrolls and wax and whispers, and you let the silence fill in the rest. There's no applause, no dramatic music, just a woman who wrote something down and meant it. That's all. That's everything. You wake to the sound of nothing, a silence so dense it presses against your skin like a second robe. But in Rome, silence is rarely just the absence of sound. It's a signal. It's a choice. It's something you wield or something you fear. And in the case of a Roman woman considering divorce, silence is more than a pause. It's a warning. Before she ever lifts the stylus, before she even glances at the wax, she's already tested the silence around her. She's withheld comment at dinners, nodded at slights, smiled at humiliation, and said nothing when her husband explained her own household budget to her as though she were a child. Rome expects that. It teaches women to hold still, to hold their tongue, to hold their breath. But eventually, that silence becomes dense, unbearable, weaponized. Because silence, when owned, becomes choice. And that choice, that moment when she decides not to stay quiet, is the most dangerous one in Rome. The law may say she can leave, but society doesn't like women who choose to speak after years of swallowing their voice. That's why so many waited, not because they lacked legal power, but because they understood the backlash, because they knew Rome feared female silence the moment it broke. You sit beside her now as she breaks it, not loudly, not in protest, but with a single quiet act opening the writing case. It's stored on a low shelf in her private chamber, alongside a few scrolls, some perfumed cloth, and a tiny bust of Minerva that's missing its nose. The tablet is blank, the wax freshly smoothed, the stylus sharpened to a point that glints in the lamplight. Her fingers hover, not from doubt, but from preparation. She's heard the stories. Women who wrote too fast and left openings for their husbands to retaliate. Women whose tablets were intercepted, whose messages were recited in jest at feasts by men who thought humiliation was a suitable punishment for disobedience. She will not be one of them. Every word must be precise. Each sentence a lock with no key. This isn't an outburst, it's architecture. And here's what's maddening: the more careful she is, the more they'll call her cold. Roman men, for all their posturing, were fragile when it came to being left. A woman who cried and begged and ran from her marriage could be pitied, but a woman who sat down, wrote her declaration calmly, and left with her chin level, that was terrifying. That was unnatural. That was the kind of woman poets warned against, and historians tried to explain away. Juvenal, in one of his frothing rants, accuses such women of being hard as oak, unfeeling, manipulative, untrustworthy. But what's more likely, that Rome was filled with heartless wives, or that Rome had no idea what to do with a woman who stopped playing along. Historians still argue whether women in the late Republic and early Empire were becoming more modern in their legal autonomy, or just more visible thanks to the anxieties of male writers. It's a blurry line, but one thing is clear: the silence they once used to survive had become, by the 1st century BCE, something else entirely: a stage for rebellion. Not the theatrical kind, but the subtle one. The kind that didn't seek crowds or burn temples. The kind that simply said, "No more," and walked away. She doesn't need to explain herself. That's the gift of Roman law. Once written and sealed, the tablet speaks for her. She doesn't owe him a scene, just the facts. And still, the fear hangs, not from her, but around her, because every servant who watches her write is now a potential messenger. Every cousin who hears the rumor might leak it to the wrong senator's wife, and every echo of her departure will come back warped. She left him for another man. She was barren. She poisoned his wine. Rome doesn't care about accuracy. It cares about narrative. And women who control their own endings threaten that narrative. That's why she plans more than just the message. She plans her return route. She plans who will greet her at the villa. She's already sent word to the steward to prepare her old chamber, the one with the east-facing window. She has, in her subtle way, prepared a quiet fortress, because once the silence breaks, she'll need protection from the noise. You glance at her hand, steady, unhurried. The stylus leaves thin furrows in the wax, the Latin letters small but exact. She doesn't embellish, doesn't beg, doesn't accuse. The message reads like a property transfer, which, in a way, it is. She's transferring her life back to herself, and yet, between the lines, you sense her heartbeat. Not sadness, not anger, just resolve, like a stone rolled into place. This is the part that surprises you. She smiles, not widely, just enough to crease the corners of her mouth. She remembers something, a time when she almost wrote this same letter a year ago, maybe longer, but something stopped her. Fear, probably, or guilt, or the soft voice of her sister saying, "Just wait, he'll change." But he didn't, and she did. Not all at once, but slowly, like ink spreading through cloth. And now the woman who smiles as she seals the tablet is no longer asking herself whether this is the right decision. She's simply making it. And here's your fringe tidbit for tonight: some wax tablets. Rare ones. Ceremonial ones were reportedly dyed red for divorce declarations. The color of finality, of seriousness, of ritual. No proof survives, of course, but ancient texts occasionally reference the red wax of parting, and you can't help but picture it. Her stylus etching dark lines into crimson beeswax. The message standing out like a wound, not to bleed, but to warn this is real. This is final. This is mine. She finishes, folds the tablet shut, ties the leather strap, and presses her seal into the soft wax at the hinge. Her family's crest, a lion in profile, mid-stride. You wonder if she chose it deliberately, if she thought about how fitting it was that her seal featured a creature known for its patience and its bite. The message is now unalterable. If tampered with, the seal will break. If opened, the content will speak. She hands it to her most trusted servant, a woman, of course. Someone who's kept every secret that ever mattered. No words are exchanged. Just a nod. A departure. The tablet begins its journey. And now the room is quiet again. But it's a different silence. Not the suffocating kind. This silence breathes. It stretches its limbs. She pours herself a small cup of wine and sits near the window, not watching the street, watching the sky. It's still pale, not yet evening. The light cuts across her lap and rests on her hands. Her fingers are stained with wax, the faint outline of the stylus still in her grip. She doesn't wipe it away, because that, too, is part of the story, the residue of choosing to speak. The sun dips low behind the terracotta rooftops as you follow the message, her message toward its final destination. The servant moves swiftly but with practiced calm, cutting through side streets like a shadow slipping between worlds. In her satchel, nestled between layers of folded cloth, is the wax tablet that holds the weight of an unmade marriage. It's warm from her hand, still sealed with the lion's crest, and the silence of the street seems to echo its urgency, but she's not headed to a courthouse, or a priest, or even a family council. No, that's not how divorce happens in Rome. The law requires only 3 things: intention, witnesses, and delivery. And as she approaches a quiet garden behind a modest domus, you realize this is where it begins. Not with grand speeches, but with 3 men sitting in the shade, sipping watered wine, and waiting to hear a marriage end. The garden is enclosed, private, tucked behind the chaos of the forum like a secret held between breaths. This is not a courtroom. It's a ritual chamber dressed as a backyard. You step lightly behind the servant, who bows and presents the tablet without flourish. One of the men, an older relative, Perhaps a notary unties the strap, checks the seal, and nods. No one raises an eyebrow. No one asks why she's leaving. Their job isn't to judge, just to witness. That's how Roman divorce works. You don't beg permission, you declare, and the presence of 3 witnesses makes it real. These men are the human parchment alive, breathing, nodding proof that the contract has been dissolved. The older man reads the text aloud, his voice smooth and neutral, not loud, just loud enough to be remembered. The words hang in the air like incense, simple, direct, irreversible. There's no need for argument, no appeal. The moment her husband hears these words recited by witnesses, it's done. He can fume, protest, sulk, but he cannot undo. That's Roman law for you sharp at the edges, but strangely efficient, especially for the elite, who live in a world where appearances matter more than justice. And here, in this garden, appearances are carefully curated. No public displays, just 3 men sipping wine, and a servant disappearing into the dusk with a satchel lighter than before. You linger by the fountain in the garden as the echoes fade. It's a strange thing, watching a marriage end without tears. But that's the point. Roman divorce isn't designed for catharsis. It's built for continuity. The structure bends, but it does not break. The wife returns to her father's house. The husband resumes his political duties. The servants adjust. The household shifts like a chessboard mid-game, quietly, efficiently, brutally. And in this moment, you understand something unsettling. Rome isn't interested in your love story. It's only interested in whether you follow the rules when it ends. Still, behind every rule is a risk. Because while the process is clean, the consequences are messy. A woman may be legally allowed to leave, but her reputation hangs in the balance like laundry in the wind, exposed, judged, and never entirely her own. Word will spread. It always does. Servants talk, neighbors speculate, and before long, her name will be dropped casually in atriums and marketplaces, wrapped in speculation like figs in honey. Did you hear she left him? Must have been another man. I heard he caught her writing letters. The witnesses might be silent, but the city won't be. Historians still argue whether the witness ritual was about legal proof or social surveillance. Some say the law required it purely for formality, a procedural step to make the divorce binding. Others believe it was designed as a quiet form of control, to remind the woman that her act, though permitted, would not go unseen. Either way, the effect is the same. Her decision is now public knowledge. And in a culture that thrives on honor and rumor, that makes her vulnerable in ways the law can't protect. You follow her quietly as she re-enters her family's villa that night. Her mother greets her with a kiss that's more ritual than affection. Her father nods without looking up from his scroll. No one says welcome home, because this isn't a homecoming. It's a recalibration. She's no longer a wife. She's a daughter again, at least legally. And with that status comes both protection and limitation. She can no longer manage her own property without a guardian. She must defer, at least in appearance, to the male heads of her household. Her autonomy is not a straight line. It zigzags through Roman expectations like a clever thief through alleyways. But she knows this already. She's planned for it. That's why she brought her own scribe. That's why her dowry records were copied 3 times, notarized, and sealed in separate scroll cases. She didn't just leave her husband. She architected her own escape, quietly, legally, permanently. And now she sits in her old room, the one with the ivy growing over the balcony, and opens her writing case again, not to compose another letter, but to write for herself. A journal, perhaps, or a new household ledger, or maybe just a list of things she never wants to tolerate again. Here's a detail most people miss: Roman women, especially educated ones, often kept private wax tablets for personal use. Notes, quotes, lists, observations. Some even drafted poems or jokes scratched in and erased later, like thoughts passing through water. These tablets rarely survive, of course. The wax was reused, melted, smoothed again and again. But every now and then, archaeologists uncover the wooden frames, the ghost impressions in soot or ash. And when they do, They find traces of lives lived between the official records, women who counted their days, women who copied bits of Ovid, women who wrote down recipes, birth dates, lunar cycles. It's humbling and beautiful and deeply unfair that so little remains. You pause now, just outside her door, and feel the weight of what she's done. She didn't make history, not the kind that gets statues, but she made a choice in a world that rarely lets women choose anything, and that choice didn't end in the garden. It continues here, in this moment, where she lets herself breathe fully for the first time in years. The marriage is over, the wax has spoken, the law, for once, has listened. And yet, even as she rests, the city moves on, somewhere. Her husband is preparing a rebuttal, not a legal one, but a social one. He'll host a dinner. He'll perform joviality. He'll make a toast to fresh chapters or new opportunities, and everyone will know exactly what he means. That's Rome. It turns heartbreak into performance, legal contracts into gossip, women into symbols. But she isn't a symbol. She's someone who wrote a sentence and meant every word. As the night deepens and the oil lamp flickers low beside her bed, she turns her tablet over one last time and smooths the wax with a heated knife, erasing the day's words. Not the divorce tablet, no. That's been delivered, sealed, witnessed, and recorded. This is a private one, a memory tablet, a place to record what she cannot say aloud. She smooths the surface, breathes deeply, and begins to write. Not to him, not for anyone else, to herself. You watch her hand move across the wax with surprising calm, as though this moment had waited for her, patiently, all along. She doesn't write anything dramatic, not tonight. Not freedom, not revenge, not even his name. She writes something simple, a date, a list of tasks, maybe an expense. It's nothing, really, but that's the point. She no longer has to perform womanhood as spectacle. She doesn't have to play the gracious wife or the silent observer. She just has to be here, now, in a room that smells like laurel oil and warm beeswax. And in that simplicity, there's a kind of quiet power Rome rarely acknowledged, the daily ritual of reclamation, the small ways women piece themselves back together after cutting the cord of marriage. You sit beside her in the candlelight, watching the shadows from the flame flicker across her face. There's no sigh of relief, no triumphant music swelling in the background, just the soft sound of stylus on wax and the faint creak of her chair as she leans forward to write one more line. The rebellion has already happened. Now comes the life that follows. Because what no one really told you, what history often glosses over, is that Roman women who divorced didn't vanish. They didn't fade into some tragic mist of lost virtue. No, many of them became more powerful than before. Divorce was not a stain. It was, for some, a strategy. And elite women in particular understood this well. They knew that their marriages were public performances, alliances first and personal choices second, if ever. So when the performance no longer served them, when the script grew dull or humiliating or dangerous, they rewrote it. Some even did so more than once. You might smirk at that, imagining the Roman version of serial monogamy, but Rome didn't care about romantic permanence the way modern cultures pretend to. What it cared about was decorum, which is why, paradoxically, a woman who divorced quietly and without scandal could often remarry without much social penalty, especially if her dowry was still intact, especially if she knew when to keep her mouth closed and her head slightly tilted, because Rome didn't punish disobedience. It punished indiscretion. You follow her to a dinner party now, maybe 2 months later. Her hair is styled differently, more loosely, perhaps, or with fewer pins, like someone rediscovering the feel of her own neck. She's wearing a gown that is neither ostentatious nor plain, but precisely calculated enough to show she hasn't fallen, not enough to suggest she's showing off. The host is an old family friend. The other guests are nobility, mid-level senators, widows, scholars. The topic of her divorce doesn't come up directly, of course not, but it hovers in glances, in pauses, in the way one guest mentions a recent court case involving property rights and then catches himself, as if remembering who's sitting at the table. She doesn't flinch. She smiles, offers a brief anecdote about property valuations in Sicily, and suddenly, the conversation veers away. Just like that, she's learning how to bend the air around her. There's something oddly thrilling about it. Isn't there, watching her navigate this new social terrain, where every word is weighted but no one admits it? Her divorce has made her more visible, not less, and in some circles, that visibility becomes influence. She begins hosting her own salons, not loudly, not weakly, just enough to remind the city that she is not in hiding. Philosophers attend, poets attend, even minor magistrates begin stopping by. And yes, some men show interest, not all noble, not all subtle, but she knows how to read the signs. She isn't rushing. The tablet is sealed, the message delivered. Her name is still hers. Here's the part you didn't expect other women begin to notice. Not just notice, emulate, quietly, carefully, one by one. A senator's wife you met at the baths last month sends her own tablet 3 weeks later. Another, married to a notorious drunk, asks questions about legal guardianship, about who to trust with her records. A third, younger, simply watches eyes wide, listening. It isn't a movement. Rome wouldn't allow that, but it is a ripple. One woman walks out without screaming, and suddenly the doors of a dozen other villas feel slightly less locked. And that ripple, though never documented on scrolls, is what gives the wax tablet its legacy. Not just what it ended, but what it inspired. Historians still debate whether these elite divorces had any lasting impact beyond the domus walls. Some argue they were isolated gestures, limited to the privileged few. Others believe they contributed, however subtly, to shifting norms around female autonomy. But here's what's undeniable: every time a woman carved her intent into wax and sent it across the city, she left behind not just a message, but a precedent. Something that could be referenced, whispered about, used. And in a culture where most power passed from father to son, that whisper could travel like a song in the walls. You find yourself back in her room now. Months have passed. The tablet she once used to sever her marriage now lies in a drawer beneath folded linens. She doesn't need it anymore, but she hasn't thrown it away either. Some objects you keep not for sentiment, but for grounding, a relic of clarity, a reminder that you once did something hard and lived. She uses newer tablets now for correspondence, poetry, maybe the beginnings of something else. You glimpse a line scratched lightly into the wax. Even the gods change their minds. You smile. It sounds like something she would write, quietly clever, impossible to argue with. But not everything is perfect. One evening, at a friend's gathering, a man raises his voice just enough to be heard. Strange how some women think they can change the law just by writing it. The words are coated in wine and bitterness. The room freezes for half a breath. She doesn't respond. She doesn't need to. The host quickly laughs, diverts attention. Someone else pours another cup. And yet, the moment stays. That's the price. Even now, even after the stylus, there will always be men who see her not as a person, but as a precedent, who resent her not for what she did to them, but for what she proved was possible. And she knows this. She's not naive, but she also knows something more important. The moment has passed, and she's still here. She still walks freely through the forum, still receives letters, still hosts dinners. She survived the act Rome told her she could legally do, but socially shouldn't. And not only did she survive, she's learning how to thrive. You end the evening with her at her writing desk. The lamp is low, casting a golden pool across her tablet. She writes slowly now, not from hesitation, but from confidence. Each line purposeful, each thought unhurried. You lean in, trying to catch the words, but they're hers. Not for you, not for the record, just hers. And in that, she has done something Rome never expected. She has made space, not just for herself, for others, for those who will follow, stylus in hand, heart still intact. The wax tablet rests open on her desk, the edges gently nicked from repeated use, the soft black surface bearing the faint shimmer of old words scraped away, and new ones etched in their place. Tonight, though, she's not composing a legal document or a household account. She's writing a letter. A strange kind of letter, neither addressed to anyone specific nor meant for delivery. You might call it a love letter, but not to a person. It's more like a love letter to absence, to possibility, to the space left behind when something heavy is finally lifted. She begins slowly, stylus tapping once before each word, almost like a heartbeat marking time. She writes of mornings where the silence no longer weighs, of meals eaten without commentary, of the simple peace of watching oil lamps flicker without interruption. No grand revelations, no flowery declarations, just a clean, quiet record of life reclaimed. And in that stillness, you begin to understand the real power of the wax tablet, not in what it says, but in what it allows her to say without asking permission. She doesn't need approval now. She has something better clarity. But the story doesn't stop with her, because Rome is always watching, always absorbing, always copying what works, and other women are noticing. They don't say it aloud, of course not, but their eyes linger longer when she walks by. Their greetings at the baths carry just a little more weight. Their questions become more pointed, masked as idle chatter, but sharpened by intent. Did you find the process difficult? What did your father say? Do you think the courts favored you because of your family's name? She answers gently, never boastful, always measured. But behind her voice is a new rhythm, the slow, quiet cadence of a woman who has found her footing on unfamiliar stone and no longer fears the stumble. She's not a heroine, not a symbol, just someone who rewrote the ending. And that's enough. You sit in on a gathering at her home, smaller than the grand salons hosted by political families, but more electric in atmosphere. There's wine, of course, and figs with honey, and the low hum of a lyre in the background. But it's the conversation that holds the room together. She's at the center, asking questions no one else dares. Why are wives bound by custom and not law? If a man can remarry 6 times without reproach, why is a woman pitied after one divorce? The guests shift uncomfortably, laugh politely, glance toward their cups. No one accuses her outright of impropriety, but the discomfort hangs in the air like incense burned too long. Still, they come back. They always do, because she says what others won't, because they want to see how far she'll go. And this is the quiet irony for all the rules Rome writes. For all its pomp and marble and proclamations, true change often begins in rooms like these, not in the Senate, not in temples, but in the chambers where a woman etches her thoughts into wax and dares to speak without trembling. One guest, a young woman named Flavia, lingers after the others leave. She doesn't ask about the divorce. She asks about the writing. "Do you keep your tablets?" she says, eyes wide with something between awe and fear. Even the ones you erase, and your heroine nods. Of course she does, because erasure isn't absence. The stylus leaves a memory even when the words are gone, because the act of writing again and again is how you learn who you are beneath the roles. Here's a fringe detail whispered among the less serious historians. The ones who favor stories over scrolls, some women are said to have kept a single wax tablet hidden from the world, where they wrote down everything they couldn't say aloud. Names, secrets, petty grievances, desires, a personal archive of the forbidden. These were never meant to be read. They were meant to be lived with scraped smooth, rewritten, layered like sediment over the course of a lifetime. And if one of these tablets were ever found, scholars say it would tell more truth than all the official records combined. Whether or not such things existed doesn't matter. The idea does, because it means women weren't just surviving Rome's rules. They were recording their resistance in the only space that listened without judgment wax. You begin to notice how that wax shows up everywhere. At market stalls, scribes copy prices onto tablets before inking them into scrolls. In schools, children trace letters before committing them to memory. In temples, priestesses draft prayer schedules before inscribing them into ritual calendars. The wax is everywhere, and yet no one sees it as sacred except her. To her, it's become something else, a kind of sanctuary, a room without walls, a mirror that reflects not her face, but her decisions. And each evening, as she smooths its surface with the edge of her hand, She's erasing not history, but hesitation. Of course, Rome isn't so easily impressed. There are whispers now, quiet ones, strategic ones, that she's become too independent, that she talks too much about rights and not enough about duty, that her salons are breeding grounds for unrest. Nothing official, just friction. The slow chafing of a woman who won't sit down. One senator's wife, jealous or nervous or both, suggests she may be writing things she shouldn't. The implication is clear silence is safety, and speaking even in wax is a risk. She receives the warning in the form of a poem, unsigned, slipped under her door on an unmarked piece of vellum. It's badly written, clumsy, allusion heavy, but the message is unmistakable. Know your place. She reads it once, twice, then she tosses it in the brazier without comment. The flames take it in one soft breath. Later that night, she writes in her private tablet, "They think I speak too loudly." Perhaps they've never heard a woman whisper. Historians still argue whether Roman women used writing as protest or reflection. Some suggest that the act of writing was more therapeutic than political, a kind of mental housekeeping. Others insist it was a form of coded resistance, especially when shared among trusted friends. But here's the truth. It was both. Writing in Rome was a public act, even in private. Every tablet was a choice, every sentence, a footprint, and your heroine understood that. She wrote not for applause, but for alignment with herself, with her thoughts, with the version of her life that didn't ask her to shrink. Tonight, she lights a second lamp beside her desk. She places 2 tablets side by side, one for the world, one for herself. On the first, she drafts a letter of introduction for a friend's daughter, young, nervous, entering into a marriage contract that's more business than bond. On the second, she begins a list. What I know now that I didn't then. It grows slowly. That leaving is not the same as failing. That silence is not the same as peace. That writing something down does not mean it must be believed by others to be real. She pauses, then adds, that I will never again ask the wax to forgive me for speaking. You sit beside her in that glow, surrounded by paper and oil and dust, and realize she's building something, not a movement, not a revolution, just a pattern, a shape, a way of being. And others are watching. Not everyone will follow. Not everyone can. But someone will. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe a century from now. When the wax has melted and the wood is crumbled, and only the echo of a stylus remains. That will be enough. The wax hardens overnight, but you sense the warmth still lingers beneath the surface, like a thought not yet forgotten. When she opens her tablet in the morning, there's a faint indentation left by her final sentence, a ghost line, almost illegible. She touches it with her fingertip, not to erase, just to remember. The mark isn't a flaw, it's the imprint of intention. And that's the thing with wax. It remembers even what it tries to forget. You run your eye across the surface and realize that this, too, is how she lives now. Carefully, deliberately, but never fully smooth. Beneath her calm, beneath her perfectly folded stola and softly tied sandals, there are layers of thought, of memory, of resistance that never quite melt away. Each morning begins with a ritual. She rewrites the past into the present by choosing what to carry forward. And every day, that act begins with a stylus and a blank page that's never truly blank. But today feels different. She sits longer before she writes, eyes unfocused, as if hearing something distant. You lean in, expecting another reflection, another list, but she begins in code. Not secrecy, not espionage, just intimacy. The kind of coded writing Roman women learned to protect themselves. One word per line. Each line with double meaning. Fidelis. Does it mean loyal or faithful to herself, Venio? I come or I return nomen. A name. But whose this is how they wrote when they feared being misread. And in a world where women's words were often repurposed against them, wax offered a kind of soft encryption. The stylus became a dagger wrapped in silk. She could deny everything if needed, or she could explain it to the right reader. You wonder, is this meant for someone, or is it meant to outlive everyone? She pauses after 10 lines, closes the tablet, and ties it shut with a fresh leather cord. This one she doesn't file away with the others. She places it into a small box lined with fabric, then locks the box and places it at the back of a shelf behind religious icons. You catch the subtle detail. She's not hiding it from herself. She's hiding it from misinterpretation, because Rome's not kind to women who keep secrets, especially written ones. And if that box were ever found, its contents wouldn't just be questioned, they'd be rewritten by men desperate to decode something not meant for them. That's the risk. That's the inheritance. Historians still debate whether such codes existed widely or are a modern projection onto ancient texts. They point to references in poetry, to vague lines in surviving letters that hint at shared meanings. Some say women use flowers, arrangements of words, specific placements on the tablet as symbols. Others dismiss it entirely as speculative fantasy. But you've seen the way she writes. You've watched her fingers choose their pressure with precision. If there wasn't a code, there was at least intent, and sometimes that's all you need. Because the meaning isn't always in the content. It's in the act of choosing who gets to read it. Later that day, she receives a reply, not to her secret lines, but to one of her formal letters, a correspondence she'd written on behalf of a friend. The response is respectful, flattering even. The scribe who delivers it bows lower than necessary, eyes politely averted, because now her name carries weight. Not scandalous weight, but structured, practiced, political weight. The kind Rome pretends not to notice until it's too late. She's no longer just the woman who left. She's the woman who writes, the woman who gets things done quietly and with style. And in a city where so much is performance, her restraint becomes its own theater. But not everyone applauds. There's a dinner where a guest, a senator's cousin, pompous and oily, suggests she's too clever for comfort. There's something unsettling about a woman who knows how to hide her meaning, he says, swirling his wine. It suggests she's always calculating. She smiles, cool and unreadable. Aren't we all? The room laughs, but the undertone is sharp. They're not threatened by her beauty. They're threatened by her literacy, by the idea that she writes things not meant for them. Because to Rome, a woman who writes publicly is manageable, a poet, a priestess, a scribe's wife copying documents. But a woman who writes privately, a woman who writes for herself, in her own room, with no husband to oversee or censor, that's dangerous. That's what terrifies them. You follow her one morning to the market, where she picks through dates and dried rose petals with unhurried elegance. A woman beside her, older, veiled, leans in and murmurs, "I heard what you did." No judgment, just observation, a quiet offering. She smiles and responds with a simple, "Did you?" Nothing more. Because sometimes acknowledgement is the risk. Because even solidarity in Rome must be disguised as gossip. You watch the older woman nod once and move on. Another thread pulled tight, another witness. Back home, she writes again, this time in plain Latin. No codes. A reflection on Saturnalia. On the strange way freedom is performed in a city built on hierarchy. We act like masters and slaves can change places, she writes, but only if everyone agrees it's pretend. You catch the glint of irony in the way her stylus curves. She's not mocking tradition. She's exposing its limit. And you begin to realize she's not writing to document her freedom. She's writing to test it. Every sentence is a boundary pushed. Every word a pebble tossed into a still surface, waiting for the ripple. Here's a quirky little fringe theory you won't find in textbooks. Some scholars believe Roman wax tablets were sometimes deliberately left in public view not to share content, but to suggest the presence of thought, like open books on a scholar's desk, or unread letters left near a window. A kind of visual whisper. I am thinking, I am remembering, I am recording what you hope I forget. There's no hard evidence for this, but when you see how she places her tablets just so slightly tilted near the entrance to her study, you start to wonder if it might be true. That part of writing, for her, is not just doing it, but letting others see that she could. This is where the idea of power shifts, not in loud proclamations or marble decrees, but in daily rituals, in symbols only some know how to read. She's not trying to change Rome. She's not foolish, but she's marking out a space within it, a a space where she writes the rules, or at least refuses to follow the ones that never fit. And in that act, she becomes something even more dangerous than rebellious. She becomes unbothered. A woman who writes for no one's approval is a woman Rome can't shame. She ends the day with a walk, cloak pulled loosely over her shoulders, hair bound simply. She doesn't need the dramatics anymore. She doesn't need to look powerful. She just needs to move freely, past the basilica, past the old garden where she first had her witnesses sign the divorce, past the statue of Minerva where she once whispered a wish she no longer remembers. The city hasn't changed. Not really, but she has. And that's enough to make everything feel different. Back at her desk, she opens the secret tablet one last time, just to add a single word. One word, no punctuation, no explanation. Liberata. You wake into a Rome where rumors travel faster than chariots, where silence holds more weight than oaths. And today, that silence breaks with a snap, an imperial seal being cracked open. This time, the wax tablet isn't hers. It's someone else's. A courier from the palace arrives at dawn, boots still damp with morning dew, eyes heavy with the knowledge of the message he carries. It's a divorce letter, not from an aristocrat or a merchant's wife, but from an empress. A letter addressed to the emperor himself, written in the elegant, unwavering hand of a woman who knows every curve of Roman law and every shadow in the corridors of power. She has done what very few have ever dared. She has dismissed a man who rules the world. You're not in a villa now. You're in the marble jaws of imperial drama, where a single wax tablet can cause senators to stop mid-sentence and scribes to forget their scripts. The empress, once paraded through the streets in golden robes and crowned with public adoration, has chosen to write her own exit, and that exit wasn't shouted. It was etched, folded, sealed, and delivered with the precision of a blade. The letter arrives with no preamble, handed to a chamberlain with trembling fingers. The emperor, still half-dressed, still believing himself untouchable, breaks the seal and scans the lines. He doesn't blink. He doesn't breathe. Because here it is in her hand, a simple Latin phrase that echoes like thunder in his mind. I, Julia Domna, hereby end the union. Or maybe it's another name. The historians argue which empress it was, how it unfolded, whether the tablet was burned afterward or locked in a box buried beneath the palace. But one thing is certain, he was not the one to decide. And in a world where emperors appointed gods and dismissed senators with a nod, being dismissed himself with a wax tablet is almost unthinkable. You see, even the palace isn't safe from the quiet revolution of writing. That's what unsettles Rome most, that no matter how high you rise, the wax doesn't care. It doesn't bow to purple robes or golden wreaths. A stylus has no concept of hierarchy. It simply records, and if a woman of status, even an empress, chooses to end a marriage with 10 words in beeswax, the law must listen. That's the terrible beauty of it. That's why even emperors fear those small, hinged wooden boards, because within them lies the possibility of control, slipping quietly, invisibly, into the hands of someone Rome was never designed to serve. There's a scribe in the palace, older than most, with gray in his beard and ink in his bones, who's called in to record the event. He's done this before, but never for an imperial household. His fingers hesitate over the stylus. The emperor paces, silent. No order is given to destroy the tablet. Not yet. The scribe begins, carefully, reverently, copying her words with exact fidelity. He doesn't ask questions. He knows the penalty for imperfection, but still, his mind reels. What woman writes this way? What woman dares? And what woman remains calm while dismantling the highest marriage in the empire? It's said the empress prepared the letter over weeks, maybe months, that she wrote several drafts, that she consulted jurists under the veil of religious donation appointments, that she rehearsed the wording aloud in her private garden, mouthing the verbs until they fell from her lips like prayer. This was not an outburst. It was strategy. And her motive, historians speculate endlessly. Infidelity, politics, betrayal, maybe just exhaustion. But perhaps, if you read her carefully, it was something simpler. A refusal to remain a figurehead. a decision to stop pretending that silk and ceremony were the same as affection. She didn't want scandal. She wanted truth. And in Rome, truth must often be written in secret before it's ever spoken aloud. You follow the letter as it makes its way through the inner circles read by advisors, whispered about by wives of guards, speculated over in bathhouses where noblewomen pretend not to eavesdrop. And what's remarkable isn't the content, it's the reaction. No one knows what to do. The law allows it. That's the maddening part. She's done everything properly. The witnesses were arranged. The seal was valid, the language flawless, and yet the discomfort spreads like oil on tile. Because if she can leave him, then who is safe? If she can send a tablet and end a dynasty's illusion of stability, then what's stopping anyone else? This isn't the first time Rome has seen a powerful man embarrassed by a woman's words, but it may be the most visible, and visibility changes everything. Suddenly, senators' wives begin asking questions they wouldn't have dared voice last season. Temple priestesses consider updating old rituals about wifely obedience. Even poets take notice, scribbling satirical verses under their breath, half in jest, half in awe. One writes, "She wore no sword, yet kings fell." Another retorts, "Her stylus cut deeper than any dagger." Rome laughs nervously, unsure whether to honor or fear her. Meanwhile, the empress, divorced now in all but title, does not retreat into hiding. She continues her public duties for a time, visits libraries, funds new inscriptions, hosts lectures by Greek philosophers, and in doing so, she becomes something new. A symbol not of scandal, but of what happens when a woman uses Rome's own rules to say, no. She's no longer merely imperial, she is textual, a living tablet that others begin to mirror. Here's a curious twist. Months after the imperial divorce, copies of her original letter begin to surface, not official ones, private ones, fragments, excerpts, scribbled in notebooks, whispered from tutor to student, paraphrased in letters between distant cousins. Rome doesn't need the whole text, just the idea of it, the legend, the shape of her words. And in that shape, women find something dangerously empowering precedent. Historians, of course, argue whether these copies were authentic. Most likely they weren't, but it doesn't matter. The myth grows, and myths are more persuasive than facts in a city built on founding wolves and sacred birds. The story of the empress who wrote her own ending joins the quiet pantheon of female defiance next to the Vestal virgin who refused a forced marriage, the widow who took her husband's case to court and won, the merchant's daughter who funded her own education and outwrote her tutors. All of them real, all of them erased, except in whispers, except in wax. Back in her chamber, the empress is said to have kept a single tablet from the process, not the one she sent. That's gone now, archived, or burned, or buried with the rest of Rome's inconvenient truths. But a draft remains, scratched faintly, word for word, into a slab of wax she never erased. Not polished, not smoothed, just closed and locked in a box near her writing couch. And when visitors came, she sat near it without comment, as if daring them to ask what lay inside. Most never did. You visit that room in your imagination, the scent of ink and pressed flowers in the air. The tablet is there, cool to the touch, the hinges soft from wear, and you understand what she knew all along, that power, once written, doesn't need to be shouted. It only needs to survive. The room is still, but the city beyond it buzzes like a hive poked by an unseen hand. She's not in the palace anymore, and you're not standing beside a senator's daughter. Now you're in the forum, the living, breathing mouth of Rome, where everything becomes rumor and every rumor becomes spectacle. Divorce in Rome was never supposed to be quiet. Not really, even when the law said otherwise. Even when the wax tablet closed with the elegance of finality, the aftermath was rarely gentle, because in Rome, divorce was social theater, and the audience never left. You can feel the tension in the air as you cross the mosaic stones of the marketplace, the way eyes flicker sideways when a woman walks past alone, the way whispers are folded into the folds of togas, the way everyone knows but no one says who, left whom, and why. There are names on tongues like Spice. Did you hear about Hortensia? I heard she sent her husband away during the Saturnalia feast. I heard she wrote her divorce on a wax tablet made of ivory. It doesn't matter what's true. Rome never needs truth. It needs stories. And once a woman sends that tablet, she becomes one. You walk beside one of them now. Her name is Lucilla, and her sandals click too crisply against the stones, drawing attention she neither wants nor avoids. She was married to a man who spoke too much and heard too little, a legal scholar who loved arguing more than listening. After 5 years, she sent the tablet, 3 witnesses, a sealed message, and a courier who returned pale. That should have been the end. But it never is, because Rome doesn't let women leave without cost. Now, everywhere she goes, people stare, not with open scorn, but with a curiosity reserved for those who've stepped out of the expected script. They don't know whether to admire her or fear her. And that uncertainty is intoxicating, especially for the women watching from balconies, from doorways, from the corners of their own hesitation. You follow her into a shaded colonnade where the gossip thickens like perfume. Here, the wives of magistrates and merchants gather in whispered clusters, their laughter as practiced as their silences. One of them, tall, wrapped in deep red wool, raises her voice just enough. It's a shame, really. She had such a beautiful household. Why ruin it? Another replies, softer. Maybe she didn't ruin it. Maybe she escaped it. They both laugh, brittle and brief, and sip their wine without drinking. Lucilla doesn't respond. She knows how the game is played. She knows that every word she speaks now will be weighed against her wax. Because once a woman breaks the marital contract, she becomes public domain. People want to know if she regrets it, if she cried, if she begged, if she burned his clothes or slept with his cousin, or sent the tablet while wearing his ring. Rome wants drama. Rome demands it, and she gives them none. This is the cost of quiet power. You can leave your husband with legal precision and unflinching grace, but the city will still drape you in scandal, not because of what you did, but because of how calmly you did it. If she'd wailed or broken dishes, maybe they'd be more forgiving, but no. She wrote, sealed, and left, like a magistrate, like a senator, like a man. And Rome is not ready for that symmetry. It applauds it in theory, mocks it in practice, because when a woman acts like law, she disrupts the theater, and Rome loves its theater. You slip through the crowd now, catching fragments of stories, some true, some embellished. She took the slaves with her, he begged her to stay, got down on his knees in the atrium. Her father bribed the witnesses. She carved the whole message herself. No scribe. I heard she rehearsed it for weeks. It doesn't matter what actually happened. Once the tablet is delivered, it doesn't belong to her anymore. It belongs to the city, and the city will rewrite her with its own stylus, scribbling meaning into margins she never drew. Historians still argue whether Roman society punished women more for leaving marriages or for refusing to explain why. Some say the stigma faded over time, that multiple marriages became normal among the elite. Others point to the poetry, the satire, the moral essays, proof that female autonomy was always under scrutiny. But none of those scrolls capture what it felt like to walk through the forum after you've ended a marriage. None of them describe the way people stop speaking when you enter a room, the way men suddenly remember your name, the way other women lower their eyes, not in shame, but in longing. You watch Lucilla enter a basilica now, not for worship, but for presence, to be seen, to remind Rome that she's still here, unshaken, unrepentant. She stands near the scroll market, browses legal commentaries, holds a volume of Cicero with fingers steadier than most scribes. Someone mutters nearby, "She should be at home." Someone else whispers, "She's making a statement," but she isn't. She's just living. That's the scandal. That's what makes people furious. She isn't campaigning. She isn't writing letters to the Senate. She's buying scrolls and walking slowly through the crowd like her freedom is not a performance, but a fact. Here's a strange little fringe rumor that surfaces sometimes in low conversations. Some women, after divorce, would hire actors to stage their public appearances to create controlled gossip, to distract from the truth, to generate just enough scandal, to keep the story exciting but manageable. a red ribbon worn loosely at the throat, a specific perfume associated with widows, a deliberate rumor about a Greek lover who didn't exist. None of it provable, all of it plausible. Historians can't agree whether these were real or satire, but either way, they speak to the deeper truth divorced women had to become playwrights of their own afterlife, because surviving the tablet was just the first act. Navigating the city afterward, that was the real performance. You return to Lucilla's villa with her. It's smaller than the one she shared with her husband, less ornate, but quieter. There's a sense of peace in the way she moves through the rooms. No steps rushed, no orders barked. She pours her own wine now, not because she must, but because she can. She keeps her tablets in a small drawer near the window, wrapped in linen, ordered by date. Some are scratched with correspondence, others blank. One, the original, she hasn't reopened since the day she sent it. She won't, not because she's afraid, because it's done. And as the sun sets behind the hills, you realize the theater isn't hers, it's Rome's. And she has chosen not to play the role. That's what makes her dangerous. Not the wax tablet, not the law, not the rumors, but the refusal to perform grief or guilt. She wrote her lines, she left the stage, and now she watches the city spin, not from the center, but from the margins, where the quiet people make real decisions. You hear the servant call for the evening oil lamp to be lit. The flame catches, the room glows, and on her writing desk sits a fresh tablet. She doesn't pick it up tonight. She just lets it sit there, waiting, because now she knows the story isn't over. It never is. The villa is hushed, lit only by the flicker of one modest oil lamp and the low rustle of wind against the fig trees outside. But even in this silence, you sense something stirring not in the air, but in the arrangement of objects, the sealed tablets on the desk, the ink-stained cloth folded neatly beside them, the legal codices tucked between pots of rosemary and lavender. She's preparing not for battle, not for spectacle, but for what comes after the final sentence. Because if there's one thing Rome forgets in all its performative wisdom, it's this: women didn't just leave their marriages. They often took the household with them. The linens, the jewelry, the olive presses, the inherited property, and, most notably, the slaves. You walk through the corridor with her now, bare feet tapping softly against marble floors, and it becomes clear that this isn't a house she's hiding in. It's a house she's rebuilding around herself. And in Rome, where ownership equals power, she's not just surviving the divorce, she's thriving on its terms. She reads over the property list carefully, her finger gliding along the names of household slaves once counted as part of the marital estate. 2 were gifts from her father, 1 purchased jointly, 3 inherited. According to Roman law, the division of slaves in a divorce depended on the dowry terms and the contract. And lucky for her, she had her father's jurors draw up that contract with surgical precision. The slaves return with her, not because of sentiment, but because of legality. And yet, as she walks past the kitchens and nods to the familiar faces, Tertia, who braided her hair each morning, Philo, who carved the ivory box for her stylus, there is something heavier in her gaze than mere calculation. These people are not just assets. They are witnesses to her before and after. They remember the nights she cried quietly over an untouched supper. They remember the arguments muffled by heavy curtains. They remember when she practiced her signature for the divorce tablet over and over, trying to keep her hand from shaking. You can't help but notice that the slaves seem more relaxed now, too. The tension that once crackled through the atrium has evaporated. There are fewer harsh orders, fewer broken goblets, fewer silences filled with fear, and that's not sentimentality. It's observation. Divorce, for all its legal clarity, creates emotional echoes through a household, and everyone hears them. In many Roman homes, when a wife left, the staff braced for punishment. But here, they find themselves reabsorbed into a structure that, while still hierarchical, is at least stable, predictable. She gives orders clearly, concisely, with a tone that suggests both kindness and consequence. This is not softness. This is command. Outside, the estate stretches into the dusk rows of olives. A few goats, the sound of sandals scraping dry soil, This land was technically part of her dowry, and therefore, by Roman law, could be reclaimed if she exited the marriage honorably. She did. No accusations of infidelity, no scandal, no public drama, just a stylus and a seal and 3 witnesses nodding at the right time. Now the land is hers again, not metaphorically, not emotionally, legally, and with that land come responsibilities and opportunities. She walks the perimeter at sunrise with her steward, discussing yields, rot, labor needs. She takes notes on her wax tablet as they walk, lifting the hem of her tunic to avoid the dew. This, too, is power, not the loud kind, the rooted kind. You step into the storage room where her dowry chests are being unpacked. They are marked with her family's crest, wrapped in thick fabric, nailed shut by her father's household manager months ago. The inventory scrolls list everything with obsessive detail: 12 silver cups, 2 necklaces, 3 bronze lamps, a statue of Minerva, 5 amphorae of imported oil, a tapestry from Alexandria, a set of Etruscan hairpins, and an unusually ornate inkstand shaped like a lion. One chest holds the small writing table she used as a girl, its edges worn, the legs uneven, but the surface still smooth from years of use. She asks for it to be placed in the new study. Her voice is soft, but her eyes are decisive. She's not decorating a villa. She's reclaiming an identity. Rome has always measured people by what they own. You are your inheritance, your name, your lands. A man without land is a man without voice, and a woman without property is a ghost. That's why the dowry system, though designed by men, gave women their loophole, because the moment she takes it back, she isn't just out of the marriage, she's back in the world. She has liquidity, reputation, and, if she's careful, enough leverage to set her own terms for the next chapter. That's what makes the wax tablet so powerful. It's not just an exit slip, it's a key to re-entry. And now, with her accounts balanced and her household re-established, she can write again not letters of departure, but letters of negotiation. She sends word to her cousin in Gaul, asking for updates on the property there. She writes to her sister in Baiae, requesting a recipe for that mulled wine everyone liked. She even drafts a formal inquiry to a local magistrate regarding taxes owed by her former husband on a parcel of disputed land. That last one is more than financial. It's a warning shot, a reminder that she's not going to be silent just because the marriage is over. She's still a legal actor, still a participant in the web of Roman power, and this time, her stylus is sharper. Historians often romanticize Roman wives as tragic figures, powerless, decorative, forever subject to male guardianship. But the records tell a more complicated story. Some women, especially those born into wealth and educated in letters and law, wielded their rights with astonishing clarity. They understood contracts, they understood leverage, they understood that Roman law was not a fixed wall, but a maze. And if you knew where the openings were, you could walk through it with your head high and your name intact. That's what she's done. That's what they never expected her to do. A fringe anecdote floats in your memory, one about a woman in Pompeii who, after divorce, commissioned a fresco of herself, holding a wax tablet, not a scroll, not a mirror, a tablet. The message was clear, her identity wasn't ornamental. It was written. That fresco, buried in ash for centuries, remains one of the most quietly radical images in Roman art. A woman not being admired, a woman writing. And though your hostess hasn't painted herself onto a wall, she's done something equally enduring. She's kept writing after the ending. That's rarer. That's harder. Back in her study, the oil lamp glows low again, and she opens her tablet not to plan or reflect, but to sketch. Not drawings, ideas, outlines, a system for training her household to manage correspondence. Notes on a literacy school she's thinking of founding for the daughters of freed women. A schedule for when to travel to her uncle's estate, and, curiously, a line that reads, "Letters of thanks to those who did not look away." You wonder who those people are. Maybe the steward who brought her tea on the day the courier left. Maybe the midwife who told her calmly, "I heard, you're brave." Maybe the neighbor who, instead of gossiping, sent a single rose. You look down at the wax, its surface gleaming faintly, and realized that it no longer holds the residue of departure, it holds continuity, purpose, a future. Divorce in Rome was never just about leaving a man. It was about reclaiming your legal self, your movable assets, your identity, and she's done it not with a parade, not with a lawsuit, but with daily, deliberate action. She closes the tablet gently, smooths her hand across its surface, and smiles not at anyone, just at herself. Because she knows she left with more than her dowry. She left with herself. Morning breaks over Rome with the dull clang of metal shutters and the soft creak of carts along the cobblestones. But in her study, the light is more subdued, a golden haze spilling across wood and parchment, touching her open wax tablets like an old friend. She's seated, quiet as ever, chin resting on one hand, eyes not on the text but on the shadows between the lines. There are things missing, gaps, empty corners where names once lived, or feelings, or something she didn't have the nerve or the time to write down. And now, as she fingers the edges of one particular tablet, there's a faint frown pulling at the edge of her mouth. This one is old, not from her recent life, not from the year she left him, but from the years before the marriage even, when her writing had no audience, no legal purpose. The wax has darkened with age. She recognizes her own hand, but barely. Her letters were larger then, less cautious, more curved. She remembers this one as soon as she opens it. It was a practice note, something she wrote after watching her mother receive a similar message. Not a love letter, a goodbye, written in rehearsal, long before she had anything to say. And now she wonders how many tablets like this were written and never sent. How many women carved out their anger or their heartbreak, then melted the wax and let it vanish. The truth is, most of them are gone, lost to time, the wax dissolved, the words forgotten, the wood used for other purposes, and that erasure is its own kind of silence. She presses the back of the stylus to the indentation, trying to remember the girl who wrote it. What did she imagine then? Did she think she'd ever use the real version? Or did she believe, as many young women do, that marriage was permanent, that endings were other people's problems? You sit with her in that memory, feeling its weight settle like dust in your lungs. The wax tablet in her hand is nothing extraordinary, just pine wax, leather hinge. But it's also everything. It's a relic of thought, a fossil of feeling, a monument to what might have been and what eventually was. And that's the paradox of Roman life, isn't it? So much depends on what survives, and yet most of what mattered never did. The grand speeches, the public trials, the laws carved into stone, those remain. But the quiet moments, the whispered decisions, the scratch of stylus in the night, those have vanished, unless you know where to look. She places the tablet back in its box, not carelessly, not reverently, just with understanding. And then she turns to the pile beside her. These are the ones she's ready to discard, not destroy, not yet, but retire. They're the records of her departure, the drafts, the witness statements, the financial summaries, all of it legitimate, all of it necessary. But now that she's settled her accounts, reclaimed her land, and restructured her life, the documents feel heavy, like she's been carrying a war on her back and forgot how it feels to walk without armor. She doesn't burn them. That would be too final. Instead, she wraps them in linen, places them in a cedar chest, and marks it Paracta, done. She doesn't need to reread the story. She lived it. And yet, even as she closes that chest, a strange thought lingers: how many other women's tablets were never found. Not the letters sent to husbands or scribes or fathers, but the ones meant only for them. The ones that told the truth. Maybe they were buried in gardens, hidden in walls, lost in floods, or thrown into the Tiber in a fit of fear or shame. And with them, thousands of voices uncatalogued, unnamed, unread. Some of them might have been brilliant, witty, scathing. Maybe one woman, centuries ago, wrote a line so true it would have shifted the course of how we understand Roman women forever. But the wax melted, the wood cracked, and the memory was swallowed. You remember a scroll once discovered in the ruins of a villa near Herculaneum. It mentioned the Book of Shadows, a phrase scholars still argue over. Was it metaphor? A diary? A collection of unsent letters? Was it a phrase coined by the writer herself? Or borrowed from elsewhere? The scroll didn't say. It broke off in the middle. And now, it sits in a museum, flattened, unreadable, a monument to everything we'll never know. She once saw it herself, before her divorce. She stood there for almost an hour, staring through glass, wondering who that writer was, wondering what else was left unsaid, and now, sitting in her own villa, with her own chest of wax-written memories, she wonders if someone will one day do the same to hers. That's the curse of being legible in a world that erases. You can write your truth in wax, in ink, in marble, and still watch it disappear under someone else's name. And so she begins a new project, not a public one, not even a secret one, just a private decision. She takes a clean tablet, warms the wax, and begins recording the names of women she's known, friends, servants, midwives, neighbors, not gossip, just names, just memories. Little notations beside each one spoke freely when no one watched. Helped me hide my writing, never asked questions, just brought tea, didn't look away. It's not meant to be published. It's not meant to survive. It's just meant to exist for now. Because for too long, Rome has only remembered women when men decided they mattered. And she, like so many before her, is tired of that silence. Here's a strange detail scholars argue about in some corners of Rome. It was believed that unspoken names had power, that if you wrote someone's name and buried it, you tethered their spirit. It was superstition, of course, dismissed by most rational minds. But still, some women did it, wrote names in wax or on shards of pottery, and hid them in niches, behind walls, beneath hearthstones. Not curses, not prayers, just preservation. A memory solidified. She doesn't believe in ghosts, not exactly, but she believes in forgetting, and forgetting is its own kind of death. So she writes, slowly, carefully, line by line, and though the wax cools quickly, she warms it again and again, refusing to let the surface grow still, because stillness, for her, means being overwritten. She has no delusion that her words will live forever, but she wants them to live for her, for now, for the space she holds between silence and spectacle, for the life she's building not to be remembered, but to be real. A servant enters quietly with a tray of bread and honey. She nods, thanks her, writes her name in the tablet with a soft smile, brings sweetness without asking. It's not poetry, it's not law, but it's true. And in Rome, truth needs all the shelter it can get. She doesn't know what tomorrow will bring. Another rumor, another invitation, another letter from someone who once pretended not to see her. But tonight, she will write names. And perhaps tomorrow, she will write something else. Because the wax still takes her words, and as long as it does, she will keep shaping them. Evening folds over Rome like a dark wool cloak, and you sit beside her again as the shadows stretch long across the tiled floors. The oil lamp crackles softly, its flame casting the stylus's shadow across the open tablet like a sundial counting not time, but intention. Tonight, she hesitates not out of fear, but from a different ache fatigue. Not the kind that makes you sleep, but the kind that makes you quiet. She's written so much, traced so many names, calculated every step of her return, of her reinvention, and yet now she pauses, because the words she's writing tonight are not for her records, not for history, not even for memory. They're an answer, a response to a poem published just days ago, an ugly, clever, venom-laced composition penned by a man who once sat across from her at dinner and complimented the wine. His words now wind their way through the city like ivy choking a wall, repeating the same tired theme that a woman who leaves is no longer a woman. That silence was her virtue, and speech her disgrace. That the stylus in her hand was never meant for truth, only decoration, The poem doesn't name her, but it doesn't have to. Everyone knows. Everyone always knows. You feel the tension in her wrist as she grips the stylus a little too tightly, pressing its tip against the wax without writing yet. The insult wasn't new. Rome has long had its poets for hire, its satirists who sharpen their envy into verses and call it wit. But it stings nonetheless, not because it's accurate, but because it's accepted, because the audience laughs and nods, even as they secretly admire the woman who dares to live unapproved. She's read this kind of verse before she studied it as a girl. Martial, Juvenal, Horace when he was in a mean mood. They all sang the same tune: a good woman is quiet, or dead, or imaginary. A real woman, one with decisions and contradictions and ownership of her own breath. She's too much. She spoils the illusion. She ruins the poetry. You glance at the wax, where she finally begins to write. Not a rebuttal, she's too clever for that. She doesn't argue on their terms. She drafts instead a different kind of line. Not prose, not verse, something in between. It's observation dressed in rhythm. He thinks I left because I was angry. She writes, but anger's a fire. I left like water calm, slow, and without asking. The stylus glides more smoothly now, the wax softening under her hand as though listening. She continues, he calls me disloyal. I was loyal longer than he was kind. Then he imagines my silence as consent. He never imagined it was strategy. You lean closer. The words aren't just offense, they're mapping something deeper. A countersong, quiet and sharp, meant for no stage. She knows no poet will recite it in the form. She doesn't need them to. The wax hears, and that's enough. There's something haunting about this kind of reply, personal, unseen, and unrepeatable. You ask yourself who will read this, who should read this, and you realize it's not for a reader. It's for the act, the doing. Because in a culture obsessed with spectacle, sometimes the most radical thing is to make something that never asks for applause. She closes the tablet softly, ties the strap, and places it on a shelf lined with other responses never sent. Not because she fears reprisal, because she refuses to perform indignation on command. That's what they want for her to flinch, to cry, to crack. And instead, she writes, unseen, undiminished, uninterested in their rage. A fringe theory among modern scholars lingers in the footnotes of obscure dissertations that Roman women developed a kind of underground script, certain phrases and word orders, subtle literary fingerprints, that allowed them to recognize one another's work, even when unsigned. It was a way to connect, to say, I'm here too. Most historians scoff at this. It's too speculative, too poetic. But she's read the same scrolls, seen the same patterns, and she isn't scoffing. She's tracing her own rhythm now, adding her thread to a fabric woven in wax. It's not a movement. It's not resistance. It's something older. Kinship, maybe. A shared breath between women separated by walls and husbands and laws, but not by understanding. She walks through her villa at dusk, the tablet still warm in her hand, passing servants who nod respectfully and avoid her gaze, not from fear, but from deference. She's earned that, not by yelling, not by declaring herself queen of her own little world, but by never faltering in her pace, even when Rome howled at her back. And tonight, she walks to her courtyard and sits beneath the fig tree, letting the night bloom around her. The sounds of the city beyond the walls drift in distant, forgettable. But her mind holds the rhythm of that poem, not the satirist's, hers, the one only she will read again, the one that doesn't demand applause, just space. She remembers a line from Ovid, read aloud years ago in a room full of girls too young to know its meaning. Letters are the ghosts of feelings too dangerous to speak. That line stayed with her, not because it was sad, but because it was true. And in Rome, where women's spoken words vanish into the dust of banquets and marketplaces, the stylus remembers what the tongue must forget. That's why they hate her writing, because it lingers, because it dares to outlast the insult. You sit beside her again, the tree casting long fingers across her lap, and she opens a blank tablet. This one isn't for defense. It's for remembering. She writes a list, not names this time, but moments. When he forgot my birthday, and I said nothing. When my maid wept for her dead brother, and I dried her tears while my husband scolded her for weakness. When I practiced my signature by moonlight, hoping I'd never have to use it. Each line a weight lifted, a truth spoken only here. And maybe, just maybe, someone centuries from now will find the wood frame in the ashes of a buried room and wonder what it once held. Historians still argue what to call these writings. Are they personal archives, private testimony, ritual resistance? No one agrees, but you've seen it now, and you know, it's all of that and more. It's a way of existing in a world that pretends you don't. It's a way of shaping the silence before it shapes you. She finishes the tablet, seals it, and places it next to the other 6 now, neatly stacked, unmarked, no titles, no intention of publication, but alive, like seeds, quietly waiting. And then she turns, leaves the courtyard, and retires without ceremony. No long prayers, no dramatic looks at the moon. Just one last glance at her shelf before blowing out the lamp. In the dark, the wax cools, and the room becomes still again. But the silence, it belongs to her now. The following morning arrives, not with thunder, not with turmoil, but with the mundane shuffle of a broom across stone ordinary, forgettable, which is exactly what she's come to cherish. Not because she fears attention, but because in Rome, forgettability is a kind of freedom. For the first time in years, her name hasn't appeared in any verses, in any bathhouse anecdotes, in any tight-lipped conversations held between cups of wine. The scandal is old enough now to be boring, and in this city of spectacle, boring women become invisible, and invisible women become dangerous. She rises slowly, not from exhaustion, but from control. She sets the pace of her own morning. She washes without rush. She selects her stola without urgency. She eats grapes with one hand while scanning the latest court reports, pausing now and then to note which magistrates seem particularly fond of citing old precedents. She smiles faintly. She's memorized those precedents. She rewrote some of them into her own scrolls last year and made quiet corrections the jurists were too arrogant to double-check. No one questioned her. Why would they? She sends them wine, and yet, for all her comfort, she doesn't forget. Not the sting, not the eyes, not the silence that followed her into every room after the wax tablet was sent. Her household is orderly now, her finances stable, her influence intact. But there is something else, something unshakable, the certainty that everything could be taken again, if she weren't so careful. She's not afraid, but she's aware, and so she watches. She watches how the law changes under new emperors. She watches how women are portrayed in the plays that circulate among the poorer districts. She notices when certain phrases too bold, too clever, not wife material, start creeping back into polite conversation. She's not paranoid. She's prepared. That is how she lives now, not with vengeance, but with vigilance. You follow her to the tablinum, where she keeps her scrolls, her correspondence, and, most importantly, her tablets. The wax has darkened slightly with age, and the leather hinges creak when opened, but they're intact. Each one contains a record not just of the past, but of how she survived it. One tablet in particular draws her eye. It's blank, new, untouched. She fingers it like a priestess might handle a relic. This is how it always begins, not with drama, but with quiet. She intends to write today, not about her story, but someone else's. A friend, a neighbor, a woman she once met at a dinner party who whispered that she, too, wished to leave but didn't know how. She never saw her again, and now, perhaps, she never will. But she remembers her eyes, so she writes to the one who stayed. The stylus dips, hesitates. I saw you. I remember your silence. I hope you're still alive, in whatever way you can be. It's not poetry. It's not philosophy. It's not even legal language. It's something else, recognition. A message not meant for the courts or the gods, but for the ghosts. Rome is full of them. Not the dead, but the disappeared. Women whose names never made it into records. women whose stories exist only in absence. And now, with each line she carves into the wax, she's writing them back into the world. Not because anyone will read it, but because someone should. This kind of writing won't be archived. There's no clerk to preserve it, no marble to immortalize it, and yet it feels more urgent than anything she's ever written, because it speaks to a history deeper than Rome's own mythology. A history of women who wrote in margins, in wax, in whispers, a history of women who didn't demand revolution, just the right to be unremarkably themselves. She finishes the note, closes the tablet, and marks it not with her name, but with a symbol she once carved into the underside of her desk as a girl, a vine with a single curling leaf. Her mark, her trace, her refusal to be forgotten. Here's something strange, something scholars only speculate about. They say some women passed these kinds of messages between each other, hidden inside ordinary correspondences, that recipes were codes, that prayer lists were metaphors, that the wax tablets carried more than groceries and dates, they carried despair and hope and warnings. Not every woman could leave, but those who could left something behind. A sentence, a phrase, a map disguised as a meal plan. You can laugh at the absurdity of it, or you can imagine the weight of having no other way to speak. You watch her fold that tablet and place it not with the rest, but tucked between two books on domestic architecture books no one in the household bothers to touch. Not because they're dull, because they're hers. And everyone knows when something is truly hers, it isn't to be handled. Even her steward, who manages her finances with obsessive loyalty, knows never to touch the bottom shelf of her library. Not because she told him, because she didn't need to. Outside, the olive trees sway lazily in the wind, and you remember the first time she walked this same garden path after the divorce, unsure whether the ground would still feel like hers. It did. More so. In fact, the earth didn't care who signed the tablet. It responded only to water, to light, to care, like the wax, in a way neutral until touched, then permanently shaped. She walks slowly now, no longer rehearsing her movements, no longer wondering if every step is being watched. She knows they're still watching, but she's learned the rhythm of indifference. She's learned to walk with the posture of permanence. You sit with her again in the atrium that evening, a bowl of figs between you, the day cooling into something soft and drowsy. She opens another tablet, this time to write her will, not because she feels the end near, just because she likes to be ready. The stylus scratches slowly, precisely. She leaves land to her niece, her books to a freed woman who once helped her through a difficult illness, her jewelry to be divided among her household staff, not as payment, but as acknowledgement. And her tablets? She hesitates. Then she writes, to be burned, except one. She doesn't specify which. She doesn't need to. Someone will know, or no one will. Either way, it's her choice. That's what all of this has been about. Not rebellion, not vengeance, not spectacle. Choice, that slippery, sacred thing Rome pretended women didn't deserve, but occasionally, reluctantly allowed them to grasp, through law, through dowry, through wax. It was never enough, but it was something, and she took it, and she used it, not to shout, to shape. Historians, years from now, will ask whether women like her actually existed, whether the records were exaggerated, whether elite Roman women truly wrote their own destinies in wax and sealed them with iron resolve. And they will argue, they will footnote, they will speculate, but they will not know what you know that she did not write for them. She wrote because she could, because she had to, because a life unwritten is a life too easily forgotten, and Rome forgets so quickly. She closes the will, seals it, hands it to her steward without a word, and as the last light fades across the red-tiled roof, she opens one final tablet, blank, smooth, untouched. She smiles, and writes only this, I am still here. You wake before she does, or so it seems, though in truth she's already been lying there in the pre-dawn stillness, listening to the birds shift quietly in the cypress trees beyond her window, her mind circling something she couldn't name even if she tried. It isn't worry. It isn't even memory. It's more like a soft hum beneath her ribs, a question that stopped needing an answer. She rises eventually, pulling a shawl over her shoulders, stepping out into the quiet corridor with bare feet on cool stone. The house still sleeps, but her mind, as always, writes. She passes by her shelf of tablets without pausing, not because they aren't important, but because she's memorized every one. They are etched into her, not just the content, but the pressure of each stroke, the hesitation in one corner, the confidence in another. She knows exactly which one cracked at the hinge when she closed it too firmly the day her father sent word that her ex-husband had remarried. She didn't flinch. She simply noted it and wrote her niece a gift list instead. Life, after all, keeps unfolding. Wax is never empty. It always bears the ghost of the last sentence. And yet, as she sips her morning infusion, mint leaves crushed and steeped in water, warmed on the hearth, she finds herself thinking about the scholars, not the ones in scrolls, but the ones yet to come, the ones who will dig through dust and ashes and try to make sense of what they never lived. She imagines them hunched over scraps, arguing in low voices about what this or that phrase meant, whether a woman could really have written such a thing, whether she was alone in her thoughts or part of a broader, secret tradition. Historians still argue whether women in Rome were truly capable of initiating their own divorces, or if they were simply guided, propped up by fathers, brothers, patrons, and she wants to laugh, not from bitterness, but from the absurdity of it, as though any man could have planned the quiet fury it took to press a stylus into warm wax and unmake a life she had spent a decade stitching together, as though she needed a sponsor to stop tolerating being erased. You remember the way her name appears now in certain conversations, careful, curious, never quite neutral. She's very composed. Someone says, "She's always writing," says another, with a tone that almost makes it sound like a threat. And yet they never quote her, not directly, because her words don't live in speeches or published scrolls. They live in tablets no one can read unless she chooses. And that, perhaps more than anything, unsettles them. They can't interpret her because she has stopped writing for interpretation. She writes to remember. She writes to exist. She writes simply to write. Today, though, a letter arrives not on wax, but on vellum. Unusual, formal, from a legal scholar in the provinces who read her private commentary on household law and wishes to correspond. He's careful with his words, deferential but precise, asking her opinion on a clause in Lex Julia regarding the division of property upon separation. He doesn't praise her personally. He praises the clarity of her syntax. That, in itself, is a compliment worth more than gold in a city where women are rarely allowed to be precise. She reads the letter once, twice, then sets it aside. Not to ignore it, but to let it settle. She doesn't rush to reply. She wants her answer to carry not just insight, but silence, the kind of pause that makes people lean in just a little closer. And when she does reply, it's not on vellum. It's in wax. 2 tablets, carefully inscribed, wrapped in oiled cloth and tied with a cord dyed deep blue. Her seal, pressed with firm fingers, leaves no doubt. She doesn't ask for respect. She assumes it. Her reply is crisp, considered, and, of course, correct. She cites 3 precedents, offers a 4th of her own design, and closes with a single sentence, "I would welcome further discussion should you remain curious." No flattery, no apology, just precision, pressed into place. That evening, she places a copy of the tablet on her shelf with the others, not because she needs a record, but because the act of copying is sacred. The stylus touches down again, and she remembers her mother's hand guiding hers decades ago. Letters are not for decoration, she used to say. They are for keeping yourself when no one else does. And she has, through marriage, through erasure, through fire and forgetting and the hungry mouth of Roman rumor. She sits with a friend later that night, a quiet woman, older, widowed 3 times and never remarried again. They speak of gardens, of illness, of the price of dried fish. But eventually the friend leans in and says, "Do you ever think you'll write about all of this, not just for yourself, but for others?" And your heroine smiles, soft and unsentimental. I already have, she says. It just doesn't look like a story to them. And her friend nods, because they both know what kind of story Rome allows women to tell and what kind it buries. This one will not be buried. You watch her later, alone again, smoothing the wax on a blank tablet. She isn't sure what she's going to write. She just knows she must, that the act of writing is the only way to make the day whole. Her stylus moves slowly now, not from age, but from consideration. She writes, "Sometimes I remember things I didn't live. I remember her, the one who stayed, the one who never got to send her letter, the one whose stylus snapped before the wax was cool." She doesn't clarify who she means. Perhaps it's someone real. Perhaps it's every woman she's ever been. And she continues, "If I write it now, maybe it reaches her. Maybe she reads it through the candlelight of time." She stops, not from doubt, from fullness, because sometimes one line is enough. A strange theory floats in certain circles that written words can echo across generations not because they are read, but because they are remembered, that even forgotten tablets leave residue in the human soul, that maybe, just maybe, memory itself is a kind of ink or wax. She doesn't care whether it's true. She only knows that she must keep pressing, that each evening with her stylus is a choice not to disappear. Rome may not notice, but the wax does, and that's enough. She closes the tablet, ties the cord, and presses her seal once again. The lion. The same mark she used to end her marriage. The same mark she uses now to continue herself. Even now, as you walk beside her through the twilight of her life, you can feel that nothing has faded, only shifted. The wax tablet, once her weapon, has become her lantern. She carries it with her not as proof of defiance, but as a quiet companion, like a worn stone kept in a pocket grounding, unspoken. Her hands are older, the stylus slower, but her thoughts remain sharp. No, sharper. Time has scraped away the performative polish of her early writings. She no longer writes to impress. She writes to endure. She no longer seeks clever turns of phrase. She seeks words that feel like breath soft, necessary, invisible, unless missing. Tonight, she writes with no intention to keep the tablet. She melts the wax first, smoothing it into a glistening slate of possibility. She writes with the understanding that it will be destroyed, and somehow that makes each word feel more alive. Her stylus hovers for a moment before it begins. To the girl who hasn't written yet, she begins, "You're not late. You're just early in a world not ready." She pauses, the corner of her mouth tugging upward as if amused by her own paradox. But there's truth in it. She remembers how the act of writing once felt illicit, thrilling in a way nothing else did not even love, because love could be taken, love could turn, but a sentence was hers, entirely, wholly, unshareable unless she chose to, and in a city built on power and marble, and male names carved into stone, she chose to speak in wax, knowing full well how impermanent it was, but that's what made it beautiful. Stone is for the conquerors, wax is for the ones who survive, and she survived. She survived the expectations, the rearranged marriages, the veiled insults dressed as compliments. She survived the awkward toasts at dinners she no longer needed to attend, and the knowing glances from senators who called her dangerously articulate. She survived the loneliness that came not from isolation, but from being the only one in the room who could see the thread unraveling and chose to pull it anyway. You glance toward the shelf where her tablets are now stored in a carved wooden chest, lined with linen and hidden behind a panel only she can open. There are more than before, not dozens, hundreds. Some are nothing more than fragments. Others contain entire treatises, but none of them are labeled. She prefers it that way. If someone someday tries to study her, to understand her, they'll have to do it the hard way. They'll have to read everything. And maybe that's her final act of rebellion, refusing to be summed up, refusing to be known through a single wax tablet labeled the divorce. That's the one they always want. That's the myth. But that tablet was just the beginning. The wax hardened again afterward, over and over, bearing witness to dinners, griefs, births, betrayals, small kindnesses, and questions that had no answers. She writes slower now, and not every day, but when she does, the silence that follows feels fuller, like the room is bowing in acknowledgement. Sometimes she writes a list of words she no longer needs: obedience, apology, permission. Other times, she writes down things no one else would find important: the shape of her sister's laugh, the color of the apricots last spring, the precise way the villa smells during a rainstorm. She writes to prove she lived, but not in the way history records, not as a name attached to a scandal or a lover or a law, but as a person who was here, who saw, who remembered. And now, as she finishes tonight's tablet, something shifts in her. She doesn't say it aloud, but you feel it. She's nearly done. Not dying, not declining, just complete. The story she's been writing across all those years, in the soft gray wax, is finally circling back to silence. And the silence is no longer something to break. It is something to rest in. She seals the tablet with her line mark once again, places it in the chest, and this time, she locks it not out of fear, but out of ceremony. She turns from it gently, as if closing a book after the final page. The next morning, she rises just as she always does. She washes her face, braids her hair, dresses with the same attention to texture and symmetry. But something is different. She doesn't go to the tablinum. She doesn't touch the stylus. Instead, she walks to the garden, sits beneath the fig tree, and watches the wind move through its branches. She no longer feels the need to write it down. It is already written. And now, as the sky darkens one last time in this long wax and wool tapestry of a life, you realize you followed her through something extraordinary, not the fall of a regime, not the rise of a new empire, but something rarer, a woman who refused to be only one version of herself. A woman who sent her divorce not as a cry for freedom, but as a declaration of being. A woman who turned wax into witness. A woman who taught herself how to speak, and then, once she had spoken enough, taught herself how to stop. The world won't remember her name in forms or temples, but someone, somewhere, will stumble upon a sliver of wax in the ruins, and maybe, just maybe, they'll wonder. So now, you lie there, still beneath your covers, as if the night itself has curled around your shoulders, listening to the quiet echoes of a woman who once pressed her truth into something so soft it could be wiped away, and yet, somehow, it wasn't. Her wax tablets have long since melted into the earth, their words blurred by time and weather and disinterest. But you heard them. You heard every slow, deliberate stroke of her stylus. You followed her through kitchens and corridors, through courts and gardens, through fury and reflection, through solitude and resilience. You traced each mark not with your eyes, but with your breath. There is a kind of peace in knowing that not every legacy needs to be carved in stone. Some are meant to disappear, yes, but not before they shape something, not before they reach someone. And in the hush that follows her story, you might begin to feel something loosen, some old fear, some need to explain yourself, some belief that your silence means surrender. It doesn't. Sometimes, silence is simply where the story ends, and where rest begins. Let your thoughts drift now. Let the stylus fall. The wax will wait for you tomorrow. For now, you've heard enough. Close your eyes. Breathe. You are still here.